Alabama and Washington have something in common right now. Might not be what you think. And is Jedd Fisch leaving Arizona great for the Big 12? Not yet.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on earth. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat over 50 infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. So Kalen DeBoer leaves Washington, and he goes to fill the shoes of Nick Saban at Alabama. And now Jedd Fisch leaves Arizona to go to Washington and fill the shoes that Kalen DeBoer left empty there. I have thoughts on that coming later, but I want to start with the Crimson Tide. Is everyone aware of what's going on right now in Tuscaloosa? Yeah, Kalen DeBoer is there. Everything from the outset, if you're just talking in a coaching sense, is very good. I think DeBoer is sharp. I think he's going to win. I think he's going to win quickly. He does have a little bit of roster building to do. And this is the perhaps unspoken, and I'm now speaking it, commonality between Alabama and Washington. You had big-time coaches that were so iconic to their programs in different senses, of course. Nick Saban, the best coach in the history of the sport. Kalen DeBoer, just a really, really good coach who had 2 outstanding years at Washington in which he went 25-3 and played in the national championship game. But Nick Saban at Alabama is leaving behind a roster that is going to look, shall we say, very different from a year ago. And Kalen DeBoer at Washington is leaving behind a roster that will look even more different. Now, we don't even know if there will be more defections from Alabama, and it's not as if it's uncommon. It's not as if it's the first time that players have ever left before. When a head coach leaves or a head coach retires. And Saban's staying on in a consulting role, trying to convince players to stay committed and whatnot. But they've already had 5-star wide receiver Ryan Anderson in the 2024 cycle. He decommitted rather quickly and is crystal balled to the Auburn Tigers. And here are players that were on Alabama's team this season that will not be on the team next season. Center Seth McLaughlin, he's going to Ohio State to block for former Ole Miss running back Quinshon Judkins. The transfer portal's fun for some. Wide receiver Isaiah Bond. He had a notable catch in college football this season. You might remember it. Jermaine Burton, that was their leading receiver. Amari Niblack, that's the guy who was involved. Sean Murphy, the linebacker. Roydell Williams, the running back. And Jase McClellan is off to the NFL. So Kalen DeBoer at Washington is leaving behind not much for Jedd Fisch. And Nick Saban at Alabama is leaving behind not that much. I think the spring transfer portal window is going to be more important for these 2 programs than perhaps anybody else. Because these are 2 places that expect to win at a high level. They do not tolerate losing, especially in Tuscaloosa, though in Seattle, we saw in 2021, you have a bad season and things get uglier elsewhere, we're going to move in a different direction there. So these are 2 places in which the rosters that got to the college football playoff this year are going to look so radically different. And that's a challenge for the coaches. But in the age of the transfer portal, it can be done. You can build a roster, maybe not as good as the roster you'll have in year 2. But the ability to go in and get players who can now transfer for a second time without penalty and build a roster for this season that is competitive and lets your fan base know, hey, everything's going to be okay, because that's what those fans want right now. They want to know for certain, hey, everything's going to be okay. Because there is an element of uncertainty when you have a coaching change. It's why fans don't care for what happens when a coach leaves, because players leave, recruits decommit, and you're just left wondering, is the next guy going to be a good hire? And so when you have a coach that succeeds so much he gets pulled away to another job, that question is even more on the minds of college football fans. So I think for these two programs, that is a glaring similarity that the head coaches have to address. Is it going to be easy? Probably not. I think it's easier down at Alabama than it is at Washington. If you look at Washington, you talk about leaving the cupboards somewhat bare. There are talented players on the roster. There's some talented recruits in there. But Washington from this past season is going to be without their, get ready for this, their first round NFL quarterback, their top 10 pick wide receiver, their next two wide receivers, both of their tight ends, their starting running back, their starting left tackle, who's a first round pick, their starting right tackle, who's probably a second or third round pick, their linebacker, their top corner is in the portal. These are not all of the additions. Those are just the ones I'm going to name right now. These are the challenges. I don't think it's going to be easy. I do think these guys are very capable. So let's talk about Jedd Fisch. Let's talk about Jedd Fisch leaving Arizona. I do feel for the fans in Tucson. I really do. For those who are unaware, Jedd Fisch took over a program that had lost 12 consecutive football games over the course of 3 seasons. The end of 2019, the COVID year, it was a mess. It was an absolute utter disaster. He found it in shambles, complete and utter shambles. And this past year, he guided them to a 10-3 record. They beat Oklahoma in the Alamo Bowl. I know Dylan Gabriel opted out of the game, but beating Oklahoma in a bowl game was unthinkable when Jedd Fisch first arrived. This is a guy who went 1-11 in his first season and just went 10-3, rattling off 7 straight wins. They didn't lose a game by more than 7 points. They lost to USC on the road by 2, Mississippi State on the road by 7 in overtime, and Washington by 7, a team that, played for a national championship. So this Jedd Fisch guy, he can really coach. And for him to have been so instrumental to what Arizona did, turning their football program around, getting them relevant, and building a team that can compete for the college football playoff in a 12-team era in 2024, that stings for Wildcat fans. There is no doubt about it. They are not feeling a whole heck of a lot of love lost there. It was not well received when he announced to the team he'd be leaving. It was apparently a short meeting, and it didn't go over very well. Did not go over well. Washington's got their guy, and they've got a good football coach. As I mentioned earlier, he's got a tall task in front of him with regards to roster building. But here's the thing. With Jedd Fisch leaving Arizona, the Big 12, I think collectively, you could have fan bases reasonably look at that and say, yippee-ki-yay. Oh my goodness, we're not going to have to deal with Arizona. They were going to be a conference contender. I had them picked as a conference contender. And as of right now, I do. Arizona in 2024, one of the reasons they would be a preseason, at the very least top 20, if not top 15 team, is that they are set to return 18 of their 22 starters. 18 of 22. That's a lot. That's a team that was vastly improved on defense, wildly productive on offense, and had the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year at quarterback in Noah Fifita. Tetairoa McMillan at wide receiver. He was a true sophomore this year, over 1,000 yards, all-conference, highest-rated recruit in Arizona football history. He's lived up to the billing. This only becomes a moment of rejoice and jubilation of sorts for Big 12 fans who say, I didn't want to deal with Arizona next year. If Jedd Fisch convinces those key guys, a lot of them, to follow him to Seattle. And that is what we're waiting to see. Noah Fifita and Tetairoa McMillan are just 2 of the names that I will be on the lookout for to see who enters the transfer portal. Who goes with Jedd Fisch to Washington to don the purple and gold in 2024 instead of the red and blue of the Arizona Wildcats? Because if they decide to stick around, I understand Washington making the outside hire. I think that makes a lot of sense, given that there wasn't that much continuity to try to maintain, given all the players that were going to depart and were out of eligibility. For Arizona, they're considering their offensive coordinator as a head coaching candidate. That could make a lot of sense, because if that keeps everybody intact, Arizona can still be a very good team in 2024. So Big 12 fans, do not get happy or giddy at the idea of the Wildcats being some major pullback team or not as good as everybody thought come 2024. You got to wait and see who goes into the transfer portal and what that roster is going to look like, because there are a lot of open positions up in Washington, as I talked about earlier. There are a lot of spots there where guys could transfer and they could start right away. How many will go? Time will tell. Time is also going to tell something else about the Alabama Crimson Tide. By the way, while it's on my mind, because it often is, have you checked out FanDuel yet? The NFL regular season is wrapped up. The playoffs are here. There's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get 150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. It just doesn't get that much better than that, folks. You don't even have to be right. Just put $5 down, you get 150 in bonus bets. It's that simple. The app is super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, and you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best place to find popular parlays. Do all that and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup. It's that easy. $5, win or lose, 150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC, joining me here on the show. Turbulent times over there in the Southeastern Conference. Of course, Oklahoma and Texas are new additions to the league for next season. But the big dog for a long time has been Alabama, Gordy, and they're going to look very different next year. I want your reaction to kind of everything that has transpired down there in Tuscaloosa with DeBoer coming in and the number of guys who have decided to leave the Alabama program that were impact players this year.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly time moves. I mean, literally a week ago at this time, Nick Saban was still the head coach at Alabama, and we thought, oh, well, got to the playoff, came up one game short, but, all is right in Tuscaloosa. And then the news comes out that, Saban is leaving and all hell breaks loose. And, things move fast, man. I mean, this is crazy how quickly they have moved with Kalen DeBoer going to become the Alabama head coach. And he's working very quickly to assemble a staff, and it sounds like Ryan Grubb is going to be his OC. And in addition to that, he's bringing guys over from Washington as wide receivers coach Jamarcus Shepard, O-line coach Scott Huff, which coached the Joe Moore Award winning offensive line this year. So that's good news. And tight end Nick Sheridan, all coming over from Washington. But the problem becomes, how many of those guys have ever stepped foot in the South? Now, Nick Sheridan coached at Tennessee back in the day, so he's got a little SEC experience. They are going to retain two coaches on the staff, running back coach Robert Gillespie and D-line coach Freddie Roach. They've coached a long time under Saban, but yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly Kalen DeBoer, who I don't think has ever stepped foot in a high school in the state of Florida or Atlanta or, something like that. He said, hey, I'd never been to the West Coast before either prior to going to Fresno and Washington, so I had to learn quick. Well, he's going to have to learn quick in the SEC region to start recruiting.
Well, that's true at some level. He'd also been the Fresno State offensive coordinator previously before he went to Indiana and then came back to Fresno to be the head coach for a couple of years. But the recruiting element of this, to me, is fascinating because DeBoer's going to have a lot of the same staff, as you said, a couple of holdovers from the Nick Saban era, but that staff up there in Montlake was not known for their premier recruiting classes. It was take guys who were already on the roster. Now, Alabama's going to have, I think, some talented guys that, maybe didn't play a ton this season, but certainly Alabama has stacked high-level recruiting classes on top of one another for really the last 10, 15 years in college football. But they did not assemble an elite recruiting staff, or at least they didn't make a push to have elite recruiting classes up at Washington. How do you think that translates down to Alabama, given that there are going to be a lot of similar faces from who DeBoer had alongside him up in Seattle?
Well, it's funny. You said Alabama's had a lot of elite recruiting classes. Spencer, they've even been either been number one or number two for the past decade. I mean, it's they're usually number one. But if
I was putting it softly. I probably was putting that a little bit mildly.
Yeah. I mean, if they're not one, they're two. Georgia got up there once. Texas A&M, we all know about that class 2 years ago that they jumped them and they were number one. But Bama's been right there, either the number one or number two recruiting class every year. No, this is where Nick Saban comes into play. The rumors are that Nick Saban will still have an office in the building. We know the morning after he announced his retirement, he drove onto campus at 7 a.m. and went into the office. Everyone's like, what's he doing? He was going to get on the phones and start calling players, calling recruits. He's there to help Kalen DeBoer. I think after the big announcement, I think all the higher ups at Alabama said, look, we got to have a plan here. Saban, you got to help us. You got to play damage control here and help us convince these kids. Because here's the thing, Kalen DeBoer is an X's and O's head coach. we know he's really good. His track record shows it. He's been a winner everywhere he's been. But it's going to take that Saban influence to help some of these kids go, trust me, this guy's got it. He's the real deal. Because a lot of these high school kids are going, I don't know Kalen DeBoer. I've never met him. He's never come to my high school before. He never came into my games. This is where Nick Saban gets on the phone and goes, look, I saw you last year. We offered you. We want you to come play for the Crimson Tide. Ain't a whole lot going to change from me to DeBoer. That's what they're going to try to sell over these next couple of weeks to kids at Alabama. But I would not be shocked if there's a lot of kids, Spencer, that say, I'm in wait-and-see mode because, I know what Lane Kiffin does at Ole Miss. I know what Josh Heupel's running at Tennessee. I know what Brian Kelly's doing over at LSU. We know what Hugh Freeze is doing at Auburn, or building at least. We don't know what Kalen DeBoer is going to do as Alabama head coach. So it's going to be a tough sell. And like I said, Nick Saban's going to play a big part in this and trying to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and it's a unique situation because you have the outgoing head coach being willing to make a pitch like that, whereas Jedd Fisch at Arizona is not going to make a pitch to guys as to why they should, stay at the University of Arizona. I think just the opposite. He's going to try and get guys up to Seattle with him as he embarks on that new journey as the Washington Huskies head coach. But for Saban to not be there and for DeBoer to come in, I don't know how you can expect the recruiting to stay at the same level that it has been at under Saban. It could still be very good. They could churn out top 10 classes every year, but is it going to be a top 5 class every year? Is it going to be that sort of transition? I'm really not sure because the Alabama brand is very strong, but it was just never a priority for DeBoer when he was up at Washington. So do you think that creates an opportunity for other SEC schools to say, hey, 3 years ago when Saban was there, they wouldn't have let this kid out of their sight. They would have had him locked up, period, point blank, end of discussion. Now you've got a 5-star wide receiver in the 2024 cycle, Ryan Anderson, who was verbally committed to Alabama. He's now crystal balled to go to Auburn because he decommitted from the Crimson Tide when Kalen DeBoer came over. Now, that's, a pretty common casualty when a coach leaves, but do you think that there is going to be a little bit of a recruiting vacuum down in the South with Saban out of the head coaching position?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Williams, he committed or decommitted very quickly, and now Auburn has swept in there, and they're ready to grab him. But we just saw, too, the last day, Jamie French, a class of 2025 receiver that was committed to Alabama, he decommitted. So we're starting to see this. We're starting to see a lot of current players on the roster jumping ship, hitting the transfer portal. And so, look, it's to be expected. This happens every time a new coach takes over. There's always a period of transition, but it's a place that Alabama hasn't been in 20 years. They have not had to deal with this. And so it's amazing. There's a little grand delusion from the Alabama fans. I'm seeing a lot of them saying, oh, we're going to pick up right where we left off. That's just not the case. There's going to be a transition. There's going to be some kind of step back. Bama probably will lose a couple of games next year. And then I've seen some other Alabama fans who think, oh, well, Saban's still going to be around. He's just not the head coach. Like, he's going to be helping. Look, Nick Saban's got plenty of opportunities. He's retiring because he wants to be at home with his family. He's not going to be in the office every single day. He'll help out here and there. But I even saw one guy say, oh, well, Saban's just going to kind of be a figurehead. No, he is retired. Like, Bama fans are in for a rude awakening. I mean, they really do think that this is a guy that's going to come in and maintain this dominance that they've had. And it's nothing against Kalen DeBoer. He's been a great coach, but my goodness, he's been at the FBS level for 4 years, Spencer, as a head coach. Like, he was a coordinator for a good decade, bouncing around here and there. And prior to that, he was a head coach at NAIA, winning championships over there.
University of Sioux Falls. You put some respect on the University of Sioux Falls now. They are now Division II, thanks to what Kalen DeBoer there. I will have you know.
Well, as good as his dominant championships were over St. Francis and Carroll College, by no means are those Ole Miss, Tennessee, or Florida. Okay, like let's get with it.
So they're not. But this is also a guy who, in a full season of college football as a head coach, has never won fewer than 10 games. That's the lowest number that he has ever won. I don't expect that to change at Alabama. I think he comes in and he starts winning, and I think he starts winning very quickly at a high level. You do need great players to do that. There's no question about it. So 2 guys right now who have announced they're returning to Alabama are quarterback Jalen Milroe and interior offensive lineman Tyler Booker. So those are a couple of pieces, but certainly it takes a lot more to build a competitive football team in the SEC, even at Alabama. But I expect DeBoer to come in and be able to win quickly. But the name, and this is just the perfect example, it's a transfer example, and I think it's going to play out on the high school front as well, of what we're talking about, of other teams kind of trying to pounce on this opportunity and make the most of it. Caleb Downs was a big-time recruit to Alabama. He was a 5-star safety. He is a great football player and has been for some time. Is he going to be on Alabama's roster next year? I don't think anybody can say with any certainty that he will be.
Well, this is where NIL comes into play, and Bama's got a lot of money to play with. They haven't had to do it, right? I mean, Nick Saban's been kind of going the traditional route. They've taken care of some guys. Bryce Young got paid very well, a few guys here and there, but they've sold a lot of their recruits on, hey, come here to our football factory. You're going to play for a championship and be a first-round or second-round pick. Like, that's what they've been selling the past, whatever, since Saban's been there. And now they do have the boosters to pony up a little cash and start paying guys and take care of them. And so, look, that's going to be the first selling point. But there was a video that surfaced after the SEC championship game where Bama beat Georgia. Kirby Smart's on the field. One of the first Bama players he goes up to and hugs and embraces is Caleb Downs. And a lot of people are taking that video to say, oh, here comes Georgia. One note on Georgia, they just stole Alabama's defensive backs coach, Travaris Robinson. They call him T-Rob. He's the one, if you recall, when they were getting ready to play Ole Miss earlier this year, Lane Kiffin made the mistake of, I don't even think Nick Saban's running that defense or Kevin Steele. I think that's T-Rob. It looks like T-Rob's running that defense. Well, T-Rob was very well respected at Alabama. If you looked at any Bama fans the last week, every one of them was going, oh, my God, we got to keep T-Rob. Well, in comes Kirby and Georgia, and they steal T-Rob. Already they stole defensive back Jake Pope coming from Alabama over to Georgia. Caleb Downs, Georgia's going to come full court press after him. It's imperative on Alabama and their boosters to do everything they can do to keep him. But, hey, maybe Dan Lanning and Oregon come calling. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people interested in some of these guys on Alabama's roster.
Hard for that to not be the case with so many talented players there and so many talented recruits that are still lingering in the 2024 cycle, like Ryan Anderson, for instance. Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC. We're going to get to the top 5 transfer portal quarterback moves that we have seen so far in the country, but for now, we'll let Chris go. Appreciate the time. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we talk for just a minute about preparing for real life? Because it's a thing, whether we like it or not. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. Not what you would like to hear. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than needing a particular medication, not being able to get it, but we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. So you want to visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. It's a crazy world out there. You want to be prepared for whatever comes your way. Go to jasemedical.com, use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's jasemedical.com. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your order. So I was looking at the transfer portal quarterbacks who tend to make an impact. You look at the college football landscape from a season ago. Yeah, there are a lot of quarterback transfers making an impact. That's going to be the case again. Now, I was poking around and thinking, who are the transfers poised to make the biggest impact, combining both their talent level and the situation that they are going to? These are 2 separate factors that went into my determination for the 5 most impactful transfer quarterbacks going into next season. Number one, I don't know that this is going to be a popular take. Will Howard at Ohio State. Will Howard was the quarterback of the 2022 big champion Kansas State Wildcats. He has been pushed out of the starting role to pave the way for Avery Johnson, a talented young quarterback and a very mobile guy himself. Howard is a rather prototypical pocket passer. He's got some mobility, but he's someone who makes his plays from the pocket. I have him at number 1 is making the biggest impact because of where he has decided to transfer to. Will Howard is no longer a Kansas State Wildcat. He is going to be an Ohio State Buckeye. Ryan Day's track record with quarterbacks I don't know if you've looked at it. I'll just kind of run it through. I'll give it the old college try, as it were, to let you know what this guy has done with quarterbacks. Justin Fields, they got to the national championship game together. CJ Stroud, that's a guy who, is currently tearing it up into the divisional round of the NFL with the Houston Texans and threw for about a bajillion yards whilst at Ohio State. And then this past season, you had Kyle McCord. And Kyle McCord was a very talented freshman. He is going off to Syracuse. He doesn't make this top 5 list. He'd be an honorable mention sort of candidate for the ACC next year. He's a guy who can make some plays, but certainly needed a good bit more development. And so Ryan Day looked at Kyle McCord and they decided, nope, this is not a partnership we're going to continue to pursue. And they had a bunch of other young guys. They had Devin Brown. They've got Dylan Raiola coming in. There are options in that quarterback room. And then Will Howard became available. Ryan Day was adamant going into their New Year's Six bowl game against Missouri, a game in which they lost and the offense struggled mightily with those young quarterbacks. Contrast that to USC, for instance, who went in with a young quarterback and decided, well, this guy might be our starter in 2024. Kind of looks like Miller Moss is the dude in Los Angeles for Lincoln Riley next year, led them to a Holiday Bowl victory over Louisville. For all you who think bowl season doesn't matter, I present the 2023 Holiday Bowl. But I digress. Will Howard is someone who, once he became available, was going to go to USC. And then Miller Moss had his big game. That kind of scared Will Howard off a little bit. At least that's how it looks from the outset. And Ryan Day said, oh, well, hold on. Will Howard? That Will Howard? The Will Howard? Kansas State's former quarterback? Will Howard? Oh, I would like that guy. This selection, to have Howard at the top, is putting my faith in Ryan Day because of his track record of coaching quarterbacks. I think if Kyle McCord had stayed at Ohio State, he would have taken a step forward and been a significantly improved player and could have become an all-conference caliber guy in a revamped and loaded Big Ten conference that'll have plenty of good quarterback play next year. But instead, Ryan Day said, instead of developing a young guy, and these dudes all have talent in their own right, I want that guy there because I think he can help us. This is me putting my faith in Ryan Day and saying, hey, he has had a pretty good eye for the quarterback position during his college career as a head coach. And Will Howard is a guy who's got plenty of experience. He doesn't need a bunch of development. He needs the right system. Tell me, do you think the offensive weapons that were afforded to him, he had a great running back in Deuce Vaughn, no doubt. Do you think the offensive weapons that Kansas State had on the perimeter when he was there are going to be comparable to what Ohio State is going to be able to put around him? Because last time I checked, that's wide receiver U. So Will Howard, he's number one. Number two, Dylan Gabriel, back west in Oregon. That's a Big Ten school, by the way. I feel obliged to remind people of that because it's more than a little strange to me. I got to be honest, it's not going to feel real until they play a conference game against Illinois or Michigan State is their first non-traditional conference opponent. But again, I digress. There's just so much to get to on the show today. Dylan Gabriel's going into a system in which he has had a lot of success. That's the offensive coordinator, Will Stein, by the way. His quarterback numbers have also been quite good. He's got a bunch of great weapons. They brought in Evan Stewart, a former 5-star wideout from Texas A&M, to go with a bunch of returners, including Tez Johnson, who was a 1,000-yard receiver. They returned several starters from a Joe Moore finalist for the best offensive line in college football. Dylan Gabriel can have a lot of success. He completed about just under 70% of his passes last year, went for over 3,600 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 6 picks. Yeah, Dylan Gabriel, I think he's going to succeed with the Ducks. Next on the list, Riley Leonard going to Notre Dame. I didn't think Sam Hartman was bad this year. I also didn't think Sam Hartman was as good as Riley Leonard. I think when you looked at what Hartman brought to the table, going from Wake Forest to Notre Dame this past offseason, I personally was more impressed with what Riley Leonard was doing at Duke. And I think if you give him the right atmosphere, the right environment, the right offense, I think he can make a really big impact there and lead the Irish potentially to a college football playoff berth. That's a guy who's got NFL potential, I think more so than Sam Hartman. And I think if Riley Leonard comes in and they are running an offense that suits what he's going to be able to do and maximizes his potential, I think that could be a really, really good situation for the Irish. and Marcus Freeman. Next on the list is Cam Ward. This is more about Cam Ward than the situation he's decided to go to. Do you remember Cam Ward? Do you remember the last time we heard from Cam Ward? Let's Joker style in 2008, RIP Heath Ledger, let's wind the clocks back a year. Not a year, but maybe like a month or so, a few weeks ago. Cam Ward released a public statement declaring for the NFL draft. That was after he'd had conversations with Miami and some other schools, but Miami was kind of the school, and he decided, nah, I'm going to the NFL draft. Well, something has flipped. A switch has flipped, and Cam Ward is going to Miami. Now, Mario Cristobal's track record with quarterbacks is poor. There is no other way to look at it. I am sorry, Canes fans, but if you look at what he did at Oregon and not maximizing the talent of Justin Herbert, not being able to develop Tyler Shuck, not getting great results from Anthony Brown. Then you go Tyler Van Dyke. Well, he's off to Wisconsin now because it didn't work out as well as everyone was hoping down there in Coral Gables. I think Cam Ward is a mega talent. I think he is a mega talent. I don't know how this is going to fit offensively, but I put Cam Ward at number 4 because that guy can make NFL throws. He can make big time plays. He can be a little turnover prone. He absolutely can. But you know what you're going to do in a Miami offense? You're going to run the football, and that's something he didn't have up at Washington State, a consistent ground game. Very interested to see how that plays out. We might talk about him more later this week on the show. And lastly, one of the big hot commodities. This was almost an Oregon State situation. Instead, it's a Duke conversation with their new head coach, Manny Diaz. And Manny Diaz goes to replace Mike Elko, who goes to Texas A&M. The portal and the coaching carousels can be a little bit much. They can be a little bit much to keep track of, which is why we cover it all right here on Locked On College Football. Malik Murphy is a guy who I have seen play Power 5 football games, be productive, and win. How many teams in college football would like to be able to say that about their quarterback situation? Heck, the place he almost went to, Oregon State, the Beavs have a couple of guys in Giovanni McCoy from Idaho and Jabari Johnson from Missouri who they cannot say that about. Talented guys in their own right. Potential is very real. Malik Murphy was a hot commodity in the portal, so hot that he left before the Sugar Bowl because of the wacky, messed up world that is the college football schedule. But he decides to go to Duke. Manny Diaz slides in for Mike Elko, and he's got a quarterback who can help him win games. I don't know how many they're going to win in year one. This isn't a schedule breakdown. This is a quarterback breakdown. But that is such an advantage for Manny Diaz and the Blue Devils to be able to say, I have a quarterback at the helm of my offense who I know if we give the right pieces to, if we coach correctly, if we play well, we can win football games. How many? Well, that comes down to a number of other factors. But quarterback is not going to be something that holds them back. He may not be a Heisman finalist or the reason you win, but he was a highly sought after transfer for a reason. So I think those are the 5 most impactful quarterback transfers in all of college football going into next year. Will Howard at Ohio State, Dylan Gabriel at Oregon, Riley Leonard at Notre Dame, Cam Ward at Miami, and last and certainly not least, technically in this list, but not really, Malik Murphy at Duke. That's all for today. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.